I am Zelle Carter, 32 years old, from Ohio. And this is the day my heart broke so violently that it rebuilt itself into something stronger. It was a Friday night, one of those humid summer evenings when the air feels heavy with the scent of rain and regret. I just left work early to surprise Ethan, my boyfriend of 5 years, with dinner. His favorite lasagna, a bottle of red wine, and the kind of warmth I thought defined love. I still remember the way my hands trembled with excitement as I balanced the food tray and his keys, thinking about how proud I was of us, how far we'd come. When I opened the door, the laughter hit me first. A woman's laugh, light, teasing, intimate. Then his voice. "Shh, she won't be home yet," Ethan whispered, a mix of thrill and guilt in his tone. My body froze, my breath caught in my chest. Through the dim light spilling from the hallway, I saw them, tangled together on our couch, half-dressed, half-smiling, as if my existence was just a shadow. For a moment, everything stopped. The lasagna slid from my grip and shattered on the floor, the crash silencing the laughter. Ethan turned, eyes wide, face pale. "Zelle, wait, it's not," but it was. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I wish I could tell you I screamed, threw things, or made some cinematic exit. But I didn't. I just stood there numb, watching the man I loved scramble for excuses. The woman, a coworker of his, Lauren of course, rushed to grab her clothes, avoiding my eyes like I was the ghost of something she'd killed. "Zelle?" Ethan stammered, voice cracking. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, the kind of laugh that hurts coming out. "Then what is it, Ethan? A therapy session? Because it looks pretty therapeutic." He couldn't look at me. The silence stretched until it suffocated us both. I turned to leave, but my eyes caught on the framed photo above the fireplace, the one from our anniversary trip to Colorado. The one where he'd said, "You're my forever." I took it down and placed it on the table beside him. "You can keep forever," I whispered. "I'm done." And then I walked out. It wasn't until I was driving through the quiet streets of our neighborhood that the tears came. Not soft ones, the kind that feel like punishment, the kind that make you gasp for air. I pulled over under a streetlight, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought I'd crack it. All those years, 5 years of love, of believing in us, of waiting for a proposal that never came. And this was how it ended. In a blur of betrayal and broken glass, I drove to my best friend Amber's apartment. The moment she saw my face, she didn't ask. She just wrapped me in her arms. "What did he do?" she whispered. My voice broke. "He didn't just cheat. He made me believe I wasn't enough." That night, I slept on Amber's couch, clutching a pillow like it was the last piece of safety I had. Every few minutes, my phone buzzed, Ethan's name flashing again and again. "Zelle, please. Let me explain. You're overreacting." It meant nothing. Overreacting. That word was the knife that kept twisting. It was the word that had followed me for years. Every time I voiced a fear, a dream, a boundary. Ethan always found a way to make me question myself. It hit me then. The betrayal hadn't started that night. It had been happening slowly, quietly, through every dismissal, every subtle insult, every time he'd said, "You're lucky I put up with you." The next morning, I packed what little pride I had left and went back to our apartment to collect my things. Ethan was waiting by the door, dark circles under his eyes. He looked pathetic, but I didn't care. "Zelle, please," he said. "It was a mistake. I was drunk. I didn't mean it." I looked around, at the couch, the broken glass, the empty wine bottle. "You didn't mean it?" I repeated. "You just accidentally took your coworker's clothes off and fell on her?" His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." There it was again, the word that defined our relationship. I smiled bitterly. "No, Ethan, for once I'm being clear." I handed him my keys. "Goodbye." When I left for the last time, I didn't look back. But as the door clicked shut behind me, I promised myself something. He might have broken my heart, but he would never break my spirit. I didn't know it then, but that night would become the beginning of everything. Because betrayal, I would later learn, doesn't just destroy, it reveals. It shows you who you were before you forgot your own worth. It forces you to rebuild. Stronger, wiser, unstoppable. And that's exactly what I was about to do. After the betrayal, I kept replaying every moment, every red flag I had ignored, every time my gut whispered something isn't right, and I chose to silence it. It wasn't just that Ethan cheated. It was that, deep down, I realized he'd been breaking me long before that night. The first seeds of injustice were subtle. They always are. I remember our second year together. He'd started a new job, one that made him feel powerful. He'd come home talking about meetings, promotions, and networking drinks. I was proud of him, genuinely. I wanted him to succeed, but somewhere along the way, pride turned into condescension. "Zelle," he'd say, smirking. "You wouldn't understand corporate stuff. You're too sensitive for that world." I'd laugh it off back then, pretending it didn't sting. I worked as a freelance designer, so he liked to joke that my little projects were just hobbies. He didn't see how many nights I stayed awake, working under soft lamplight, sketching designs that would later win contracts. It was around that time I noticed how often he belittled me in front of friends. Once at a dinner party, I told a story about a client who loved my work. Ethan interrupted, laughing. "Loved it? Or just pitied you? You know, she's still building her portfolio," he added, raising his glass. Everyone chuckled politely. I laughed too, pretending not to feel the heat crawling up my neck. Later, I confronted him. "You humiliated me," I said quietly. "Oh, come on, Zelle," he replied, annoyed. "It was a joke. You need to stop being so emotional." That became his refrain, a shield for every cruelty. "You're too emotional. You're overreacting. You take things too personally." I didn't know it then, but he was teaching me how to doubt myself. The small humiliations kept coming. I'd spend hours preparing dinner for his colleagues when they came over, only for him to introduce me as Zelle, the artist, though, not a real one. They'd laugh, and I'd smile through the ache in my chest. At parties, he'd flirt openly, claiming I was imagining things. If I ever called him out, he'd turn it around on me. "You're paranoid, Zelle. No wonder people think you're intense." And every time, I'd shrink a little more. One night, I caught him scrolling through his phone, smiling at something. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He glanced up, smirking. "You don't trust me?" "I didn't say that." "Good," he said, locking his phone. "Because trust is what healthy couples have." He kissed my forehead like he was rewarding a child for good behavior, then rolled over to sleep. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I always felt small. It wasn't always bad, of course. That's what made it confusing. He had a way of reeling me back in right when I thought about leaving. Flowers after a fight. Breakfast in bed after a cruel comment. It's hard to walk away from someone who occasionally reminds you of the person they pretended to be at the start. Then came the favoritism. Not toward other women this time, but toward his career, his image, his family. His mother, in particular, never liked me. "You're too soft," she once said. "Ethan needs someone who can push him." He didn't defend me. He just smiled and said, "She means well." At Christmas, when I gave her a handmade scarf, she frowned and said, "Oh, I thought you'd buy me something nice this year." Ethan laughed and said, "See, Zelle, Mom's honest. You can't be so sensitive." I remember looking at them, two people who thought love was about control, and realizing that's what he'd learned from her. By our 4th year together, I was walking on eggshells daily, every word, every choice, every outfit. I weighed them carefully to avoid his disapproval. I stopped bringing up my ambitions. When I once mentioned wanting to open my own design studio, he scoffed. "That's cute," he said, "but maybe wait until you grow up a little first." I swallowed my anger and smiled. "You're right. Maybe someday." But inside, something cracked. The last few months before the betrayal were the worst. He grew distant, cold. He'd come home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked where he'd been, he'd sigh dramatically. "You need to stop suffocating me. I can't breathe with all your questions. so I stopped asking. I started pretending not to notice when he stayed out all night. I told myself this was just a rough patch, that all couples had them. I wanted so badly to believe we could fix it. The irony still burns, that I was the one trying to save something already buried. Amber once told me, "You know, Zelle, love shouldn't make you feel like you're auditioning for it every day." At the time, I smiled sadly and said, "I know," but I didn't know. I didn't understand what love was supposed to feel like, because when you're starved of kindness long enough, even crumbs start to taste like a feast. Looking back now, I can see how every little injustice was building toward that final betrayal. The emotional neglect, the subtle gaslighting, the humiliation disguised as humor. They were all signs pointing to the truth I refused to see. He had been leaving me piece by piece long before I caught him with someone else. I wish I could say I was angry at him for that. But honestly, I was angrier at myself, for making myself small enough to fit into the version of love he offered. That's the thing about betrayal. The moment it happens, it forces you to see how much you've betrayed yourself to keep someone else comfortable. But that realization was coming. Slowly, painfully, and inevitably, because every injustice plants a seed. And those seeds, when watered by pain, don't grow into despair. They grow into clarity. And soon, clarity would be my weapon. Grief has a strange way of moving through you. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps, it circles, it takes residence in the smallest corners of your day. After Ethan's betrayal, I thought time would dull the pain, but it didn't. It sharpened it. Each sunrise felt like another reminder that he'd moved on while I was still trying to remember how to breathe. The first few weeks after I left him, I existed in fragments. I worked half-heartedly, ate without tasting, slept without resting. My body went through motions, but my spirit felt hollow. Every sound, every smell, every corner of the city seemed to echo with him. The coffee shop where we first met, the park bench where he said he loved me, the restaurant where he promised, "Someday I'll marry you." He didn't marry me. He humiliated me. Amber tried to pull me out of it. She'd show up with wine and bad movies saying, "We're doing self-care, even if I have to drag you through it." I'd smile, thank her, and then cry as soon as she left. Because what no one tells you is that heartbreak isn't just sadness, it's identity theft. It's realizing that the life you built revolved around someone who never saw your worth. One morning I saw a post. Ethan and Lauren, smiling, carefree, arms wrapped around each other, captioned, "Sometimes love finds you when you least expect it." My chest burned. Love? He dared to call it love? The comments were full of heart emojis, of friends saying, "You two are perfect, perfect." I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall and fell to the floor, screen cracked but still glowing. I stared at it through tears, realizing something. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was public humiliation. I had to get up. I had to move. I showered for the first time in days, pulled my hair back, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, my lips pale, but beneath that exhaustion there was something else. Anger. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that builds quietly, waiting. That day, I decided something. I wasn't going to let Ethan's story be the one people remembered. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. At first it was just pain on paper. Messy, raw, uncontrolled. But then the words turned into patterns, realizations, small truths about who I had been and who I wanted to be. I wrote about the ways he made me feel small, the ways I let him. I wrote about the girl who used to believe love meant patience, even when it hurt. That's when I saw it, the shift. For the first time in months, I was writing not about him, but about me. A week later, Amber convinced me to go out for lunch. I didn't want to, but she promised it would help. We went to a small cafe downtown, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and roasted coffee beans. Halfway through our meal, laughter erupted from the table behind us. I froze. I knew that laugh, Ethan. I turned slightly. He was sitting there with Lauren, just a few feet away. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to breathe. He noticed me almost instantly, eyes widening, then darting away like a coward. Amber whispered, "You okay?" I smiled tightly. "I'm fine, I wasn't fine." But I wasn't broken either. Then I heard Lauren's voice. It's weird, isn't it? How some people just can't handle being left. I blinked. My jaw clenched. I wanted to scream, to throw their coffee in their smug faces. But instead, I leaned back, let out a shaky laugh, and whispered to Amber, "Let's go." As I stood up, I caught Ethan's eye. For a moment, I saw panic flicker there, like he expected a scene. But I didn't give him one. I just looked at him the way he once looked at me, like he was invisible. And that hurt him more than anything I could have said. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blur through my tears. My phone buzzed. "Ethan Zelle, please stop glaring at me in public. It's awkward." I laughed out loud. "Awkward?" I whispered. "You haven't even begun to feel awkward." Then another text came. "You're acting crazy again." Just move on already, that word, crazy. The one he always used to silence me. Something snapped. I typed back, "You don't get to define me anymore." And then I blocked his number. That was the moment. The breaking point. Because I realized it wasn't just him I needed to walk away from. It was the version of myself who kept accepting less than she deserved. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. The pain was still there, but it was cleaner now, like a wound finally healing instead of festering. I went for a run, something I hadn't done in months. With every step, I imagined shedding another piece of the past, the shame, the fear, the self-doubt. By the time I reached the park, I was crying again. But this time, they were tears of release. I sat on a bench staring up at the sky and said softly, "I forgive you, Zelle. Not him, just you." That sentence felt like freedom. Amber called that evening. "You sound different," she said. "I feel different," I told her. "I'm done waiting for an apology that'll never come." She smiled through the phone. "So, what now?" I looked around my apartment, the sketches scattered across my desk, the empty canvas leaning against the wall. "Now," I said, "I start over. They say breaking points are the end. But for me, it was the beginning. Because once you realize you've been living in someone else's shadow, stepping into the light feels terrifying. But necessary. And that's exactly what I was about to do. The days after my breaking point felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just empty. Silence became my new companion. And sometimes, it was louder than any argument Ethan and I had ever had. At first, I thought I wanted solitude. I told myself I needed space to heal, to think, to figure out who I was without him. But the truth? The silence was brutal. It echoed with memories I didn't ask for. His laugh, his touch, his words that still clung to me like bruises. I'd wake up in the middle of the night expecting him to be beside me. I'd reach out instinctively, only to find the cold indentation of absence. It was haunting how habit outlived love. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the apartment until it smelled of lemon polish and bleach. I rearranged furniture, boxed up reminders of him, deleted old photos. Yet every time I thought I'd erased him, he found a way to reappear. The smell of his cologne on a sweater I'd forgotten to wash. A playlist we made together. A coffee mug with a crack in the handle that he said was ours. Healing, I was realizing, wasn't neat. It was a slow crawl through mess and memory. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, studying the woman staring back. She looked tired, like she'd survived a storm but hadn't found shelter yet. My reflection whispered, "You're not enough," and I believed it for a moment. Ethan's voice echoed in my head. "You're too emotional. Too sensitive. Too much." That was the hardest part of leaving someone like him, the realization that his voice had become my inner one. I needed to reclaim my silence. To make it mine again, so I made a list, not of goals or dreams, just tiny human things. Wake up before 9, eat breakfast, take a walk without crying, draw something. Even if it's ugly, they sound simple. But they were lifelines. I started sketching again, tentatively at first. My pencil felt foreign in my hand, like it belonged to someone braver. The first few pages were messy. Shaky lines, incomplete faces, hollow eyes. But the more I drew, the more it felt like breathing. Amber called almost every night, checking on me. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. When I did, she'd say, "You don't have to rush this, Zelle. Healing isn't a race." I'd laugh softly. "Feels like I'm still stuck at the starting line." "Maybe," she'd say, "but at least you showed up to run." Then came the loneliness that felt like physical weight. It showed up in grocery stores, in crowded cafes, in the middle of conversations. It wasn't about being alone. It was about being unseen. People meant well. They said things like, "You'll find someone better," or "It's his loss." But none of it helped. What I wanted wasn't another person. I wanted to remember who I was before I gave everything away. Sometimes I'd scroll through social media late at night and see Ethan and Lauren still posting. Their perfect smiles, their perfect captions. I'd hate myself for looking, but I couldn't stop. Pain, I realized, can be addictive when it's all you know. One night, after another mindless scroll, I finally whispered to myself, "No more." I deleted my accounts. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. A few weeks later, Amber convinced me to attend a small art fair downtown. "You used to love these," she said. "You need to be around color again." I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be around people. But she was right. I'd spent too long hiding. When we arrived, the air was filled with the scent of coffee and paint, the chatter of vendors and customers. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. Curiosity. I wandered between stalls, eyes tracing over vibrant canvases, handmade jewelry, sketches of cityscapes. At one booth, an older woman smiled at me. "You have the eyes of an artist," she said. I blinked. "I used to be one," she tilted her head. "Used to be? Art doesn't leave you, dear. You just have to stop leaving it." Her words struck something deep. I bought a small notebook from her, a handmade sketch journal bound in soft leather. When I got home that night, I opened it and stared at the blank first page. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified but exhilarated. I began to draw again. Not for clients, not for validation, just for me. And slowly, the world started to feel less gray. There were still bad days. Some mornings I'd wake up and forget that I was supposed to be healing. I'd want to call him, to yell, to ask why, but I never did. Instead, I started writing letters I'd never send. "Dear Ethan," I wrote one night, "you didn't destroy me. You just redirected me." And for once, I believed it. It was around this time that I began to understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness was painful. It demanded to be filled. Solitude, though, was powerful. It was quiet, deliberate, and healing. I started taking long drives again, windows down, music loud enough to drown the ghosts. I'd pull over at lakes and sketch the rippling water. I'd sit in cafes with my notebook, watching people laugh and live and realizing I could too. The ache never fully left, but it softened. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, I said aloud, "You're doing it. Zelle, you're living." It felt small but monumental. Healing didn't come with a grand moment of clarity. It came in the stillness, in the repetition of ordinary days. It came in making coffee just the way I liked it, in laughing again without guilt, in rediscovering that I didn't need anyone's permission to exist fully. The struggle wasn't over, but for the first time I didn't fear it. Because isolation wasn't my enemy anymore. It was the space where I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. And soon, I'd be ready to stand tall again. There comes a moment after heartbreak when the pain shifts. It doesn't vanish, it transforms. The ache that once kept me awake at night began to feel different, like embers glowing under ash. I didn't know it yet, but that was the birth of my power. It started quietly. One morning, I woke up before sunrise, something I hadn't done since before Ethan. I brewed coffee, opened my sketchbook, and sat by the window. The sky was still gray, the city still half asleep. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped in my grief. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new. I began drawing again. Not the somber faces I'd sketched during my sadness, but bold, messy designs filled with color and movement. It felt like I was reclaiming my voice through every stroke, By the end of the week, I had filled half the notebook I'd bought at the art fair. Amber saw my sketches one day and gasped. "Zelle, these are incredible. You could sell these, open commissions, maybe start your own studio." I laughed nervously. "I don't know, Am. That's a big step." She looked at me like she was seeing a different person. "You've already taken the hardest step. You left him. The rest? That's just living." That night, I sat with my laptop and typed freelance designer startup grants. The old version of me would have doubted she was good enough. But that night, I wasn't her anymore. I applied for 3 small business programs before I could overthink it. Over the next few days, I built a simple portfolio site. Every design, every color choice, every word on that screen felt like a rebellion. It was me saying, "You tried to erase me, but I'm still here." The first time I hit publish, I cried. Not out of sadness, out of freedom, but growth doesn't come without ghosts. One evening, while scrolling through my emails, I saw his name. Ethan. My stomach turned. I hadn't heard from him in months. Against my better judgment, I clicked. "Hey, Zelle, I saw your new website. Looks good. I'm glad you're doing something productive now." Productive. As if my healing, my art, my new life was just some hobby. Then another line. "Lauren and I are getting engaged. Thought you should hear it from me before you see it online." My hands trembled. The old me would have cried. But instead, I laughed, because his message wasn't power. It was fear disguised as arrogance. He wanted to remind me he'd moved on. What he didn't realize was that I already had. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence, I'd learned, was its own kind of power. A week later, I received an email from one of the grant programs I'd applied to. My heart raced as I opened it. "Congratulations, Zelle Carter. You've been selected for our small business mentorship initiative." I screamed so loud Amber thought I'd hurt myself. "And I got it!" "I got the grant." She hugged me tight. "You see? You didn't need him. You never did." That night, we celebrated with cheap champagne and takeout. For the first time, my laughter wasn't forced. It was full. The mentorship program paired me with a woman named Leah, a branding expert who'd built her own company after leaving a toxic relationship. On our first call, she said, "You're not starting over. Zelle, you're leveling up." Something about her confidence was contagious. Under her guidance, I began transforming my freelance work into a full-fledged brand, ZC Designs. I poured my story into every logo, every client pitch, every creative decision. Within months, I started getting steady projects, then bigger ones. Each client review felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I was rebuilding. But with success came whispers. Mutual friends started reaching out. "Ethan's been asking about you," one said. "He saw your name on a new campaign." Apparently, my work had started gaining traction, enough that even his company noticed. I smirked. Let him watch. Because the best revenge isn't shouting your pain. It's letting your success speak in volumes he can't silence. One afternoon, while finalizing a design contract, I received a LinkedIn message from Ethan's company. "Hi, Zelle. We're seeking creative consultation for an upcoming rebrand. Would you be interested in a meeting?" I stared at the message, almost laughing. Life had a sense of irony, didn't it? I accepted the meeting, not out of pettiness, but because that was the moment I realized how far I'd come. The day of the meeting, I walked into the same cafe where I had caught him months ago. My heart pounded, but my head was clear. I wore a sharp black blazer and carried a folder of my designs. Ethan was there. Of course he was. When he saw me, his face froze. "Zelle?" he stammered. "You're the consultant?" I smiled, calm and deliberate. "I am. Should we start?" He blinked, clearly unprepared. The woman sitting next to him, his company's marketing director, extended her hand. "Zelle, I've heard great things about your work. Your designs are bold, emotional, and authentic. Exactly what we need." "Thank you," I said, my eyes never leaving Ethan's. I believe authentic storytelling is everything. The meeting went smoothly. Every time I spoke, I saw Ethan shrink a little more. He couldn't interrupt me, couldn't belittle me, couldn't control the room anymore. I owned it. When it ended, the marketing director smiled. "We'll be in touch." "You're a breath of fresh air." Ethan opened his mouth. "Zelle," I turned to him, "save it. I don't need your validation anymore. And then I walked away. That night, I sat on my balcony again, the same spot where I'd once felt broken. The city lights glittered below, but this time they felt like they were shining for me. Amber called. "How'd it go?" I smiled. "Let's just say, he finally saw what he threw away," she laughed. "Revenge looks good on you." "It's not revenge," I said quietly. "It's closure." But deep down, I knew it was both. That was the beginning of my transformation. The pain that once defined me had become fuel. The silence I once feared had become my strength. And the woman who once begged for love was now too busy building an empire to care who doubted her. This was my discovery of power. Not just over him, but over myself. Because true power isn't loud. It's quiet. It's when you realize you never needed their approval. You only ever needed your own. After the meeting with Ethan's company, something inside me shifted again. Not like the sharp burn of anger this time, but a quiet, deliberate kind of control. The type that comes from knowing the power has finally tilted your way. For weeks, I moved differently. I walked taller. I spoke clearer. Every step I took, I could feel that version of myself. The small, uncertain woman who once lived in his shadow, fading into memory. But the universe wasn't done with irony. 2 days after the meeting, I got an email from the company's marketing director. "Hi, Zelle. We loved your concepts. The leadership team would like to move forward with you as our lead design consultant. We'll finalize the contract next week." My heart skipped. This was more than a professional win. It was poetic. The same company that once mocked my work, the same man who told me I wasn't cut out for the real world, now needed me. Amber was the first person I called. "Oh my God, that's perfect," she said. "You know what this means, right?" I smiled into the phone. "It means I finally get to show them exactly who they underestimated." Still, I wasn't reckless. I didn't want revenge through destruction. I wanted revenge through truth. Slow, elegant, undeniable. I spent the next week preparing for my role. My designs for their rebrand were intentional, modern, powerful, subtly woven with emotion. I poured everything I'd learned from my pain into that work. But I also started digging. I'd heard rumors from the industry. Ethan's department had been underperforming. The company's board was pressuring management to shake things up. And Ethan, Mr. "You're lucky I put up with you," was dangerously close to losing his job. The thought didn't bring me joy exactly. It brought balance. The first project meeting took place on a crisp Monday morning. I arrived early, laptop ready, heels clicking with precision. When Ethan walked in, his face was pale again. That same stunned look he had when he saw me the first time. "Zelle," he said stiffly, forcing a polite smile. "Good to see you again." "Likewise," I replied smoothly. "I'm excited to collaborate." He nodded, pretending confidence, but I could see the tension in his jaw. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My composure was the loudest statement in the room. As the meeting began, I presented my strategy. Clean lines, bold typography, a message centered on authenticity and resilience, words that mirrored everything he lacked. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before the director spoke. "This is brilliant, Zelle. It's exactly what we need to reposition our brand. Ethan, you'll be the internal lead supporting her work." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Of course," he said flatly. I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. "Looking forward to your support." Amber later joked, "You didn't just flip the script, you rewrote it." Over the next month, Ethan was forced to work with me directly. It was a delicious kind of irony. He couldn't talk down to me anymore. Not when I was the creative head his bosses praised. At first, he tried to regain control. He'd send passive-aggressive emails. "Just a few minor tweaks," he'd say, attaching half-baked suggestions. I replied with equal calm. "Thank you, Ethan. I'll review your feedback." However, the board already approved the current direction. And every time I said it, another piece of his ego crumbled. But my goal wasn't just to watch him fall. It was to rebuild myself higher. Outside of work, life was thriving. My company was gaining momentum. Word spread about my designs, and clients began pouring in. I hired 2 assistants, both women who had stories like mine, undervalued, overlooked, but endlessly talented. Together, we built something that wasn't just a brand. It was a statement. I also started sharing parts of my journey online. Not the heartbreak itself, but the lessons from it. My posts about self-worth and resilience began gaining traction. People commented things like, "This made me get out of a toxic relationship." And "Thank you for reminding me I'm enough." That was the moment I realized my revenge was bigger than Ethan. It was against every voice, his and others, that ever told me I couldn't. Back at his company, cracks were showing. The marketing director confided in me during one of our calls. "Honestly, Zelle, I don't know how you stay so composed. Ethan's been difficult lately." I kept my tone neutral. "Change can be uncomfortable for some people," she sighed. "Still, your work has transformed the project." Upper management's noticed. By the end of the quarter, the new brand launched. It was a success, clean, modern, praised across industry publications. The credit came to me naturally. At the launch event, I stood at the podium, addressing the audience. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. I caught Ethan in the crowd, standing near the back, his expression unreadable. When the event ended, he approached me slowly. "You really did it," he said quietly. I turned to him. "No, Ethan, I always could. You just couldn't see it." He nodded, looking down. "I'm sorry." I believed him for the first time maybe ever. But I also knew that apology wasn't for me. It was for himself, for the ghost of the man he pretended to be. A few weeks later, I got a message from the same marketing director. "Just a heads up, there are some leadership changes happening here. Ethan won't be returning next quarter." I stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled faintly. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was closure. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about ruining someone else. It's about reclaiming everything they tried to take from you. That night, I sat again on my balcony, my sacred place of reflection. The air was cool, the stars bright. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who waited for love that never came, who begged to be seen, who measured her worth through someone else's eyes. And then I whispered softly, "Never again." I lifted my glass of wine toward the night sky, toasting the silence that once broke me but now held me steady. The setup was done. The foundation of my new life was solid, and the strike, when it came, wouldn't be loud or cruel. It would be graceful, inevitable, and unforgettable. Success, I'd learned, is quiet until it isn't. It builds behind closed doors, in late nights and relentless days, until one morning the world wakes up and realizes you've already won. 3 months after the rebrand launch, ZC Designs was everywhere. Magazines, podcasts, industry blogs. My work was being talked about in circles Ethan could only dream of entering. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't need to. I'd learned that real power doesn't shout, it lets its results echo. But there was one final thread left to pull, one that would bring everything full circle. One morning, Leah, my mentor from the startup program, called. "Zelle," she said, "I have a client for you, big one. They're looking for a full creative overhaul and want you to pitch." "Who is it?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Brightline Media," she said. "They're looking to outsource their design leadership." I nearly dropped my cup. Brightline Media, the parent company of Ethan's firm. It was fate. "No other word for it," Leah laughed. "You okay?" "Oh, I'm more than okay," I said slowly. "I think this might be my chance to finish a story." The pitch process was competitive. I spent 2 weeks crafting a presentation that was equal parts art and strategy. My proposal centered on emotional branding, authenticity, transformation, growth through adversity. Words that mirrored my life. The day of the pitch, I walked into Brightline's glass building with calm precision. The conference room was vast, filled with executives. And there, sitting near the end of the table, was Ethan. He wasn't leading anymore. He looked smaller somehow, hair thinner, posture tense. He glanced up, and when he saw me, his face went pale. I smiled politely. "Good morning, everyone." The head of marketing gestured for me to start. "Zelle, we've heard remarkable things about your work." I connected my laptop and began. My slides told a story, not just of branding, but of rebirth. I spoke about resilience, about turning wounds into identity, about how brands, like people, must evolve to survive. Every word was deliberate. Every pause was intentional. I could feel Ethan's discomfort from across the room. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then came applause. The CEO leaned forward. "This is powerful. Exactly what we need to move forward. Welcome to Brightline, Ms. Carter," I smiled. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to working together." My eyes flicked briefly to Ethan. "With everyone." He couldn't meet my gaze. A week later, I officially became Brightline's lead consultant, and the first department I'd be auditing? Ethan's. I spent hours reviewing the firm's structure, the data, the projects under his management. It was worse than I expected. Missed deadlines, budget overruns, a pattern of poor leadership hidden under excuses. In a private report to Brightline's board, I didn't exaggerate or embellish. I simply presented the truth with receipts, documentation, and proof. By the time I finished, I felt nothing but calm. Because this wasn't revenge anymore. It was accountability. The following month, Brightline invited me to their quarterly meeting to discuss restructuring recommendations. It was in that same sleek conference room, under those same sterile lights, that I finally saw it all unfold. The COO spoke first. "We've reviewed the internal audit prepared by Ms. Carter. Based on these findings, we'll be making leadership changes effective immediately." He turned toward Ethan. "Ethan Grant, your position will be terminated. We'll discuss transition details privately." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Terminated? You can't be serious." The COO remained firm. "We are. Thank you for your contributions." Ethan looked around the room, desperate for support. No one spoke. Finally, his eyes landed on me. "You did this," he hissed under his breath. I met his glare with calm steel. "No, Ethan, you did this. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." He stood abruptly, gathering his things, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, I thought he might say something else. But he didn't. He just walked out. And just like that, the ghost that had haunted my life was gone. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway, staring out at the city skyline. Leah joined me. "You handled that gracefully," she said. I smiled faintly. "Grace is the best revenge," she nodded. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I build something bigger." That night, I drove home with the windows down. The wind tangled through my hair, and the city lights blurred past like streaks of gold. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I deserved it. "I'm sorry, Ethan." I read it twice, then deleted it. Because closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from peace. And I finally had mine. Weeks passed, and my business continued to grow. I was invited to speak at conferences, to mentor other women in creative fields. Each story I heard, each woman who'd been silenced, underestimated, or broken by someone who claimed to love her, fueled me. At one event, I stood on stage and said, "Sometimes people will try to write your story for you, but you always have the pen. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The crowd erupted in applause. But I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for the version of myself who once believed love meant surrender. A few months later, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Ethan had left the industry altogether. Apparently, he'd started consulting independently but hadn't found much success. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because real revenge doesn't live in their downfall. It thrives in your peace. I was free. That evening, I returned to my balcony again. It was quiet, just like that night months ago when I'd sworn I'd rebuild. Only this time I wasn't alone. Amber joined me with 2 glasses of wine. "To freedom," she said, raising her glass. "To freedom," I echoed. She grinned. "So what's next, Zelle?" I looked out at the skyline. The city that once held all my pain now reflecting back nothing but promise. "Whatever I want," I said softly. And for the first time, I truly meant it. When my story finally went public, it wasn't because I shouted it from the rooftops. It was because the world started listening on its own. My designs had begun attracting attention from magazines and online platforms, but it was one particular interview that changed everything. A lifestyle magazine reached out one afternoon. The journalist, a woman named Celeste, said she wanted to feature female creatives who turned pain into power. When she asked if I'd be open to sharing my journey, I hesitated. My instinct was to stay quiet, to keep my wounds private, but then I thought about how many women were still sitting in the dark, doubting themselves because of people like Ethan. So I said yes. The day of the interview, Celeste and her photographer came to my studio. The walls were covered with sketches, color palettes, and concept boards, my creative chaos, my sanctuary. As the camera clicked, she asked softly, "What was your turning point?" I looked around the room, at the life I had built from ashes. "When I stopped needing to be chosen," I said. "When I realized I was never asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong person." She nodded, eyes glimmering. "That's powerful." We talked for hours. About the toxic relationship, about rediscovering art, about rebuilding from nothing. I never mentioned Ethan by name. I didn't have to. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. When the article was published, the headline read, "She lost everything, then designed her way back to herself." It went viral within days. Messages flooded my inbox. Women wrote from all over the world, sharing stories of betrayal, survival, and rebirth. Some said my words gave them courage to leave relationships that were breaking them. Others just wrote, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." That was the true reckoning. Not revenge, but resonance. But as the article spread, so did whispers in the industry. People began connecting dots. The man who once called me unstable, unprofessional, too emotional, his reputation crumbled quietly in the background. He'd become a cautionary tale in corporate circles, the executive who underestimated the wrong woman. I didn't celebrate it publicly. I didn't need to. My name was now associated with integrity and creativity. His was associated with regret. And somewhere in the middle of that shift, I found peace. Brightline invited me back to speak at their women's leadership event. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just months earlier, I had walked those halls as a consultant watching Ethan get escorted out. Now, I was returning as a keynote speaker. When I walked on stage, the applause was immediate. I stood under the lights, the faces of dozens of women looking back at me. "I used to think silence was strength," I began. "That if I just stayed quiet, worked harder, loved better, I'd finally be seen. But silence isn't strength, it's surrender. And you don't owe that to anyone." The room was silent as I continued, voice steady. "Someone once told me I was too sensitive to make it in this industry. What he didn't realize was that sensitivity is what makes me powerful. It's what makes me create. It's what makes me human. Never let anyone convince you your softness is weakness." When I finished, the applause roared through the room. Backstage, the event director hugged me. "That speech," she said, "will stay with every woman here." And for the first time in years, I believed it. My story had purpose beyond my pain. Later that evening, I checked my messages and saw one from an unfamiliar number. "You were incredible tonight. I'm proud of you. You don't owe me anything, but I needed to say that." It was from Ethan's sister, whom I hadn't spoken to since the breakup. I remembered how she used to look at me with quiet sympathy during family gatherings. She had seen what I went through but never intervened. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I wish him well, and I meant it." Because the most beautiful part of healing is realizing that forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself. In the following months, ZC Designs grew faster than I could have imagined. We opened our first physical studio space in downtown Columbus. My small team turned into 10 incredible women. Each one had their own story of resilience. And together we created a workspace built on everything my past wasn't: respect, kindness, collaboration. During the opening party, Amber clinked her glass against mine. "You did it, Zelle. You turned your heartbreak into an empire." I smiled. "We did it," I corrected her. She grinned. "And you made it look easy," I laughed. "Oh, it wasn't, but it was worth every tear." As my story spread, invitations poured in, from conferences, podcasts, women's networks. Every time I spoke, I reminded myself, I wasn't just telling my story for me anymore. I was telling it for the women who hadn't found their voice yet. The more I spoke, the more I saw the shift in others. The same light that had once gone out in me flickering back to life in them. That was my real victory. Months later, Celeste reached out again. "We're doing a follow-up feature on where you are now," she said. "Your story has helped so many people. We'd love to show your evolution." During the new interview, she asked, "If you could say one thing to the person who hurt you most, what would it be?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I'd say thank you," I said finally, because sometimes pain is the only thing strong enough to wake you up. Without it, I wouldn't have built this. I wouldn't have found myself. And I wouldn't have learned that love, real love, starts with how you treat yourself. The follow-up feature cemented what I'd already known in my heart. The reckoning wasn't about tearing anyone down. It was about rising so high that the people who once tried to bury you can only watch from below. That night, as I locked up the studio, I paused in front of one of my newest pieces, a painting I'd done between projects. It was abstract, fiery orange and deep blue swirls colliding in the center, titled Rebirth. I ran my hand over the frame and whispered, "We did it. Because this piece, this success, this purpose wasn't luck. It was the result of surviving every moment I thought I couldn't. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. Months turned into a year, and with each passing season, I could feel the distance between who I had been and who I had become stretching wider and wider. The pain that once felt endless had turned into quiet wisdom. Success wasn't new anymore. It had settled into my life like an old friend. My company thrived, my team expanded, and my name became synonymous with resilience. But what truly changed was my silence. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was peace. One morning, I woke before dawn and stood by the window of my apartment overlooking the city. The streets below glowed with the early hum of life, delivery trucks, joggers, coffee shops flickering awake. I thought of how many mornings I'd once dreaded, waking beside someone who made me question my worth. Now, I woke beside my dreams. People still reached out to me online, thanking me for my story, sharing their own in return. I made it a ritual to read a few messages each week, replying when I could. One read, "Your story saved me. I left my fiancé last month. I was terrified, but your words gave me courage." I sat with that for a while, tears threatening to fall. To think that something born from betrayal had become a beacon for someone else, it was almost poetic. Maybe healing isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about transforming it into something that helps others survive theirs. A few weeks later, Amber dragged me to a charity gala. "You need a break," she said. "And besides, networking never hurts." The venue was stunning. Gold chandeliers, velvet drapes, the air humming with soft laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. I wore a silver gown that shimmered with every step. Halfway through the evening, Amber leaned over and whispered, "You're being watched." I turned and froze. Ethan. He stood across the room, dressed in a simple black suit, holding a glass but barely touching it. He looked older, worn. When our eyes met, there wasn't anger or bitterness, just recognition. After a long moment, he approached me. "Zelle," he said softly. "Ethan." He smiled faintly. "You look different." "I am." We stood there for a second in the hum of conversation, the world blurring around us. "I read the article about you," he said. "You've done incredible things." "Thank you," he hesitated. "I never wanted to break you." I met his eyes. "You didn't. You built me." He blinked, swallowing hard. "You were always stronger than I realized." "I know," I said gently. "I just needed to realize it too." He nodded, looking away. "I hope you're happy." "I am." He smiled almost sadly and then walked away. No grand apologies, no long explanations. Just closure, quiet and clean. Amber joined me moments later. "That was him, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said, sipping my wine. And that was goodbye. In the weeks that followed, I felt lighter. My heart wasn't carrying that old weight anymore. I spent more time outdoors, painting, hiking, laughing with friends. The world seemed wider, fuller. One evening, I returned to the coastal town where I grew up. I walked barefoot along the shoreline, the salty wind tangling my hair, the waves chasing my steps. That beach had seen so many versions of me, the hopeful teenager sketching in her notebook, the heartbroken woman who once came here to cry, and now, the woman who came simply to breathe. I sat on a rock as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose. My phone buzzed with a new email, an invitation to speak at an international design summit in Paris. I laughed softly. That dream, once mocked, once dismissed, was now real. "See, Dad," I whispered to the sea. "I made it." A month later, I stood on a stage in Paris. Hundreds of faces watched as I told my story, not of pain, but of power. I spoke about finding beauty in brokenness, about how sometimes the cracks let the light in. When the audience stood to applaud, I didn't see fame or recognition. I saw freedom. Afterward, a young designer approached me. "Your words," she said, eyes glistening. "They made me believe I can start again." I smiled. "You already have." That was the moment I knew my purpose had outgrown my revenge. When I returned home, I found myself back on the same balcony where this all began. The city below glimmered under the moonlight. I poured a glass of red wine and whispered a quiet thank you. To life, to pain, to every lesson that nearly broke me. My story wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about me, about every woman who ever doubted her strength because someone told her she wasn't enough. I was enough. I always had been. And now, as I close this chapter of my life, I want to leave you with this. Never let anyone define your worth by how much they love you, or fail to. People's opinions are temporary. Your power isn't revenge. Real revenge isn't about watching them lose. It's about watching yourself win. It's about standing tall in the same place where they left you broken and realizing you never needed them to rise. Used to think closure came with a dramatic ending, a moment where the universe pauses, the pain dissolves, and everything finally makes sense. But now, standing here at the edge of everything I've rebuilt, I know the truth. Closure isn't loud. It's quiet, calm, and deeply personal. It's a slow sunrise after years of darkness. A year after that final encounter with Ethan, life had become simple again. Beautifully, deliberately simple. My mornings started with coffee and sketches, the soft hum of my studio filling the air. My days belonged to work I loved, and my nights were spent with people who brought me peace instead of chaos. I no longer looked back in anger. Instead, I looked back with gratitude for every betrayal that forced me to find my voice, for every ending that made room for something new. Because I had learned something profound. Sometimes the pain that breaks you is the same pain that rebuilds you stronger than before. That spring, I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment retreat in California. I almost said no. I didn't want to keep reliving my past. But Amber nudged me. "This isn't about your pain anymore," she said. "It's about your purpose." So I went. The retreat was held in the mountains, surrounded by redwoods and morning fog. When I stepped on stage, I saw hundreds of women looking up at me. Different faces, different stories, but the same fire in their eyes. I used to think survival meant pretending I was okay. I began. But real survival means feeling everything, every scar, every failure, and still choosing to rise. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding, tears glistening. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was living proof that heartbreak doesn't end you. It transforms you. After the speech, a young woman approached me, trembling slightly. "Zelle," she said. "I left an emotionally abusive relationship last month. I've been terrified, but hearing you today, I think I can finally breathe again." I took her hands in mine. "You already did the hardest part," I said. "You left. The rest is just rebuilding." And in that moment, I realized something. My story had come full circle. The strength I had fought to find was now helping others find theirs. When I returned home, the first thing I did was visit the small park near my old apartment, the one I used to walk through on days when the world felt unbearable. The cherry blossoms were in bloom, petals swirling through the air like confetti. I sat on a bench and let the memories wash over me. The tears, the loneliness, the desperate prayers whispered into the wind, and then quietly, I smiled. Because that broken girl had made it here, because she had refused to give up. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, to the universe, to myself, to every version of me that refused to quit." Weeks later, I received an email from Brightline. They were hosting a gala to celebrate their partnerships and wanted me as their guest of honor. I almost laughed at the irony. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black dress, elegant, strong, confident. As I entered the ballroom, dozens of people greeted me, shaking my hand, thanking me for my work. I wasn't that girl they once ignored. I was the woman they now looked up to. At one point, the CEO took the stage. "There's someone here tonight who reminds us all that perseverance is the greatest power," he said. "Zelle Carter, please stand." As the applause filled the room, I stood, heart steady. Not because I needed their validation, but because I finally believed in my own. Later that night, I stepped outside to breathe. The city lights sparkled against the skyline, and for a moment, everything went still. I thought of all the roads that had led me here, all the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the lonely nights spent wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. And then I thought of the woman I had become. Grounded, peaceful, untouchable. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not fame, just peace. Back home, I framed a quote and hung it in my office. It read, "She remembered who she was, and the game changed." It was simple, but it captured everything I had learned. When you stop fighting for their approval and start fighting for your own joy, the world shifts. Power shifts, and suddenly, everything they took from you becomes the very thing that sets you free. As I write these words, I think of you, the person listening, maybe hurting, maybe questioning your worth the way I once did. Listen closely. You will survive this. The betrayal, the loss, the heartbreak, it doesn't define you. It refines you. You will build a life so full of meaning that one day you'll look back and thank the pain for shaping you. And when that day comes, you won't need to tell anyone you've won. They'll see it in the way you smile, the way you walk, the way you no longer flinch when someone doubts you. That's real closure. Tonight, as the city hums outside my window, I raise a glass to the woman I've become, and to every woman who's still finding her way there. Here's to second chances. Here's to rebirth. Here's to finally becoming everything they said you couldn't. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't showing them what they lost, it's showing yourself what you've gained. So, tell me, what does peace look like for you?